Hey everyone, welcome to Housing Jersey. Thanks for being here today. I'm Jay Everett with Keller Williams Realty, the Ocean Living Office. And today, has anyone ever taken the time to explain to you what the title company's role and the settlement agent's role are in your real estate transaction? They're an essential piece, and not everyone understands what's going on with that part of the transaction. So, answers today on Housing Jersey with an excellent title agent. We are golden. So, if you wouldn't mind letting everybody know who you are, and thank you for being my guest today.
Thanks for having me. My name is Emily Bartlett, and I am a title agent for Goldfinch Title. We are parented by Trident Title in Wall Township, and we work primarily with Keller Williams, but definitely we are here to help everybody.
Awesome. And yes, I tried to wear my closest thing to a gold blazer in honor of your Goldfinch business card, which is the prettiest business card I've ever seen. It sparkles like the sun.
Oh,
Um,
thank
so I tried. So Emily, thank you for being here. My question to start off with is just from your explanation that you would give to a client, what the role is of the title company, the title agent in the transaction. I feel like it's one of those things that everybody knows is there, but not many people understand really what your role is.
Yeah, it's one of those words that gets thrown around but doesn't really get explained all too well. So basically, whenever you purchase a home, we want to make sure that the home you're purchasing is free and clear to be owned by you. Basically, that nobody has a claim to that property. So we run a full title search. We go back to, the existence, the first purchase of the property, if possible, and just make sure there's no liens against the property. Those liens can come from any sort of creditors. So, a large credit card company could definitely put a lien against your property. Any mortgages, if you got a second mortgage for anything to help out, that would definitely be a lien on the property. Taxes, unpaid taxes can put a lien on your property. So we just want to make sure that all that gets settled before you take ownership. It's really to protect you as the buyer so that nobody else can come out of the woodwork and say, hey, turns out we own, $50,000 worth of your property and now you have to pay up, which nobody wants that.
Sure, absolutely. And I think many people's first introduction to working with a title agent or hiring someone through a transaction was probably because their bank basically communicated that this was something that was necessary for them in order to get financing. So you can just bring the bank into the equation. Obviously, you're protecting the buyer in terms of making sure there's no one who's going to come out of the woodwork down the line for a claim on ownership of that property. But to your point, it's also about the position of the lien against the property from that lender, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, when you have a mortgage involved, it's required that you have title insurance. So if you're a cash buyer, you absolutely don't need to have title insurance. I mean, we always recommend it, as it is for most of us the biggest investment we're ever going to make. You want to protect that.
Sure,
It's a one-time fee too. So you're paying for
sure,
this one time and you own it for the lifetime. You own the policy for the lifetime that you own the property.
sure.
From the position, they also, on their end, they do a little deep dive into the buyer, just to check any liens against the buyer. But obviously, that's more from their end. So
Right. And if you wouldn't mind, since you mentioned the title insurance, just giving people a little understanding of who is that actually insurable to? So who's the payee if that policy needs to be called in, if something actually happens where there's a claim that wasn't able to be detected in title search? I think that's a little bit interesting, and people probably don't understand exactly what that dynamic is.
yeah, so we, like other insurance companies, like homeowners insurance and auto insurance, we have underwriters, and so they come in and they review the work that we've done. They say, okay, we're good to write a policy. The policy is in the name of the buyer, and the property. So, but technically the payout goes to whoever. If somebody comes forward with a lien against the property and we determine it's a valid claim and it just got lost somewhere, our underwriters, our company pays out. So we're protecting the buyer, but we pay out to the lien holder,
Okay,
if that
to the
makes sense.
claimant. Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. It's basically keeping the person who is protected by the policy in the property, while still making that lien holder whole. So that makes total sense. That's really helpful. And I think my first introduction before I became an agent to the work of a title agent was I was speaking with my lawyer when we were working on potentially buying a piece of property, my wife and I, and he said something about pulling title. So I had no idea what he was talking about at the time because I wasn't as educated, obviously, as I've had to become now. But can you just give someone a sense of when in the transaction you as a title agent get involved and what that first role, I mean, pulling title is probably what you were talking about earlier, just looking at, what those records show, but just explain, if you wouldn't mind, where in the timeline you're operating with that.
Yeah. So typically we work upon the attorney's request when there's an attorney involved. And most of the time that happens after attorney review has happened, and after inspections have taken place. Just they want to make sure we're doing this, so let's get started. And as far as pulling title, we actually have people who work for us that are in the county clerk's offices, and they literally go and pull the records. So they, some of that stuff is still on paper. So they're just pulling, folders down all day, what they do have on the computer. And they put together a big, we call it a binder, and they put together a big pile of paperwork essentially, that's necessary to determine that there's no liens on the property. And we send that all over along with our policy when we're able to, and that's what it means.
Right. So, and as you said, a lot of those things that you have as an organization been needing to access have been physical records in county administrative buildings. So, at this stage where we've all been in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, how have you guys had to adapt or been able to continue working, as I know you guys have at a very high level?
Yeah, initially it was a little scary, I'll be honest. We weren't sure, especially like up in Bergen County, if we were going to be able to be in those clerk's offices at all. So it was kind of just taking it a day at a time. As of right now, we are allowed in all of the county clerk's offices 3 days a week. So we have people doing overtime. They're making the absolute most of those 3 days that they're able to. We are pretty forthcoming with people about our timeline right now, that it might be limited because of how often we're able to get in there to get everything done. But we're still, I took a title order on a Thursday, and we were clear to close on the next Wednesday, so we're still plugging along.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really fast. And, considering that you're only having limited opportunities, I know that one of the other things that has come around in terms of access to critical documentation or critical sign off has been changes in the requirements that have been a little bit loosened for getting things signed and notarized. Has that been something that's been helpful in giving you guys flexibility as well?
It has to some extent. So when it comes to the remote notarization, so basically that process is just, we have a notary who, there's a specific video call platform that they're allowed to use. And the notary watches the buyer sign everything. Then the buyer FedExes everything overnight back to the notary. The notary signs with the date that they witnessed the buyer sign, and then everything is filed that way. There are pretty strict regulations as far as platforms for not only the video call, but for identity verification. So it's required that you have all those things in line, but most importantly, it's required that the lender is accepting of those terms. So though the legislation's been passed to allow us to do that, and we certainly have everything in place from our end to make that work, it definitely comes down to the lender and what they're accepting. But as long as you have a lender that's willing to go that route, we are absolutely, up and running to make that happen.
Yeah, it is amazing how many of these variables are so critical that may
Yeah.
have gone under the radar for so many years, where now it's really essential to have more flexibility or really have effective communication with all of the parties involved. And to that point, I just wanted to ask you if you had some examples or cautionary tales, either fun stories or crazy stories, because I think as the title agent, you really see every single party in the transaction more than even one party's realtor or attorney or the other. What in your experience are the things that you've seen that gave you pause in this business?
In like a positive way. I'm sorry, you kind of blipped out for a second there.
No, that's okay. Yeah, either a positive or a negative. I mean, sometimes things go, like you said, can go super smoothly if everything's lined up well, and you guys are able to get access to all the right things to get the transaction to close quickly. But also, sometimes things get bogged down because there's an unclear title or because someone didn't say something correctly, and now you're at the closing table and there's a problem. What are those things that, either good or bad, some extreme example that you think back on in your career?
One, excuse me, one major blip definitely comes up. We had a transaction. It was a bank-owned property. Um, and we had gotten all the way through everything, got to the morning, literally the morning of the closing, and we got word that there was a second mortgage that was never cleared out. It was a second mortgage for over $250,000, and everybody wanted to go ahead. They're like, we still want to buy the property. We said we can't underwrite a policy that says that. We can't in good faith sign off on something that says that you owe an additional $250,000 on this house. So essentially what had to happen was, because it was a foreclosed property, it needed to go through a second foreclosure that was just never taken care of. And unfortunately, this was something that the listing agent was aware of and chose not to disclose. So it was one of those examples of, oof, be careful sort of who you choose to go into business with. But we ended up, we were not able to close that deal. But I say that proudly because we did so, for the good of the buyer. That's who we
Right.
represent. That's who we're here to protect. And we couldn't in good faith sign over anything that said that. So.
Yeah. And, uh, for someone who is thinking about buying a property, Emily, or they haven't done so in a long time and they're not really sure how that story that you shared, how common that might be, give folks a sense of how great an outlier that is and what they can expect as a norm in their experience going through a title agent.
Yeah, that's definitely a way outlier. That's just, when you think of a negative example, that's one of the big, snafus, so to speak, that comes to mind. But typically it goes very smoothly. I mean, aside from inspection issues, that's the most common thing I hear. And that just comes down to a little negotiation. But as far as title, even if there are clouds on the title, or in other words, liens on the property, they're mostly very easily taken care of, and we can all come to an agreement that things are paid out upon closing. So it should really go off without a hitch for you. And for buyers, I always suggest, as a service, we run title for the agents that we work with ahead of time. So if they have a buyer that's considering, two different properties, we'll go ahead and we'll pull, a preliminary search on both properties, and then we can see exactly how smooth or how maybe bumpy the road might be. So I would definitely suggest, seeing if your agent's able to do that for you, and see what exactly you're in for. But for the most part, it's smooth, and we try to make it as stress-less as possible, given that it's often a very stressful time for everyone. So.
Absolutely, yeah, and I appreciate your saying that. I think that everyone, I think, sees the realtor as the front facing, or maybe their attorney as the front facing part of the transaction, but you guys in the title agency role are really getting everyone to that final table and sorting out all the nickels and dimes and making sure everybody has the great ending to their house story or their selling or buying story that they need. So I really appreciate you taking the time to help everybody understand it better.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be here.